By 1943, the United States Army Air Force was deeply engaged in the brutal, costly campaign of daylight precision bombing over German-occupied Europe. The centerpiece of this air war was the formidable B-17 Flying Fortress, a heavy bomber renowned for its ruggedness, defensive armament, and remarkable ability to absorb immense damage and still return to base. The strategic goal was to cripple Germany's industrial and military infrastructure. However, these deep penetration missions came at a staggering human cost, with entire bomber crews facing a high probability of death or capture on every single flight into the heavily defended skies. The specific aircraft that would become an aviation legend was the B-17 Flying Fortress, named All-American, operating out of Basingbourn, England, as part of the 92nd Bomb Group. The 10 young men who made up the crew were a mixture of highly trained specialists, pilots, navigators, bombardiers, and gunners, all acutely aware of the dangers they faced. The B-17 was more than just a machine, it was a self-contained fortress, and the crews depended on its structural integrity to survive the gauntlet of German Air Force fighters and relentless anti-aircraft fire. The mission on February 1, 1943, was typical of the era, yet uniquely dangerous. The target was a key rail marshalling yard and logistical hub in Trier, Germany. The flight required a long, deep penetration into German airspace, navigating dense concentrations of German Air Force airfields and heavy anti-aircraft defenses. The successful delivery of the bombs required the formation to hold its tight pattern despite enemy action, highlighting the immense courage and discipline required from every pilot and crew member involved in the high-stakes daylight raid. The B-17 Flying Fortress relied heavily on the defensive strength of its entire formation, known as the combat box. Each bomber was equipped with a minimum of 13 heavy machine guns, creating a massive, interlocking wall of fire designed to deter the aggressive attacks of the German Air Force fighter planes. The crews placed their absolute trust in the protective formation and the legendary durability of their aircraft. They knew the Germans were waiting, and the stage was set for a confrontation that would test the very limits of the B-17's engineering and the crew's will to survive. The mission immediately ran into heavy resistance as the B-17 Flying Fortress formation approached the target over Trier, Germany. The sky was filled with heavy, bursting anti-aircraft flak, and the formation was simultaneously assaulted by waves of aggressive German Air Force fighters, including Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs. The All-American took several hits but maintained its position in the protective combat box and successfully delivered its bomb load onto the rail yard target. With the primary mission complete, the formation turned and began the long, dangerous flight back toward England, fighting off relentless pursuit by the German fighters. It was during the desperate fight to escape German airspace that the catastrophic event occurred. Following a coordinated attack run, a damaged German Air Force fighter, likely a Messerschmitt, careened out of control, suffering severe engine failure. The pilot lost all control, and the fighter smashed directly into the B-17 Flying Fortress All-American. The force of the impact was immense, and the sound of the mid-air collision was deafening, ripping through the relative safety of the bomber's protective formation and plunging the crew into immediate, terrifying danger. The damage sustained by the All-American was visually shocking and seemingly impossible to survive. The German fighter's wing essentially sliced through the bomber's fuselage just behind the waist gun positions, tearing off the entire rear tail section. The tail, including the horizontal and vertical stabilizers in the tail gunner's compartment, was left dangling precariously, attached only by the main control cables and a few shreds of aluminum and canvas. The B-17 was literally cut in half, its back broken, turning the Flying Fortress into a massive, barely controllable kite. The immediate realization of the crew was that the plane was fatally wounded. The impact had thrown the bomber into a violent spin, and the pilots fought desperately to regain control of the shattered aircraft. Their first fear centered on the tail gunner, Staff Sergeant Michael Golemboski, who was trapped inside the detached section, hundreds of feet above hostile territory. Despite the structural impossibility, the pilots managed to stabilize the B-17, but the next few hours would require an extraordinary feat of flying and engineering resilience if they were to survive the long journey home. The catastrophic mid-air collision presented the pilots of the B-17 Flying Fortress All-American with a flying nightmare. The control cables running to the elevators and rudder were either damaged or completely severed, and the missing stability from the entire rear section made the massive bomber violently unstable. The pilots, displaying exceptional strength and skill, fought desperately with the remaining controls, using brute manual force and asymmetric engine thrust to compensate for the massive structural drag and the constant threat of the plane spinning into an uncontrollable dive over German territory. Amidst the structural crisis, the crew's immediate focus was the survival of their comrade. They realized that Staff Sergeant Michael Golemboski, the tail gunner, was miraculously alive but trapped inside the detached, dangling tail section. Several crew members bravely battled the freezing, intense slipstream and the massive hole in the fuselage, crawling perilously back toward the break. They managed to reach the gunner, confirming he was injured but conscious, and immediately began the terrifying work of pulling him and his guns out of the detached section and into the relative safety of the main fuselage. The most crucial improvisation followed immediately. Recognizing that the entire B-17 Flying Fortress would soon break apart due to the strain of the dangling, swinging tail section, the crew used ropes, belts, and scraps of metal to physically lash the detached structure to the main fuselage. This makeshift, high-altitude repair was a vital piece of ingenuity that provided the bare minimum of structural integrity needed to keep the aircraft flying. The broken bomber was now a crude, functional assembly, temporarily defying the forces of gravity and engineering failure. To further reduce the immense strain on the fractured fuselage, the crew was forced to dump all remaining loose ordnance, equipment, and anything else of significant weight. They jettisoned everything to lighten the load and maintain a straight, level course. The pilots realized that the plane could not withstand any sudden maneuvers or further combat. Their choice was stark: attempt the long, perilous, straight-line flight back to the relative safety of England, or bail out immediately into hostile, occupied territory, abandoning their wounded aircraft and their chances of survival. The crippled B-17 Flying Fortress All-American now began the most perilous segment of its journey, the long flight across heavily occupied territory toward the coast. The aircraft, structurally compromised and struggling to maintain its altitude, was a shocking sight to anyone below. The pilots fought a continuous battle with the controls, compensating for the massive drag caused by the detached tail section. Every minute was a test of the makeshift repair and the B-17's legendary, but now profoundly strained, structural integrity. The crew knew that any slight turbulence or sharp turn could cause the fractured fuselage to snap entirely. During this agonizing flight, the broken bomber was spotted by German Air Force fighters. Yet what followed was one of the most remarkable acts of respect recorded in the air war. Instead of aggressively finishing off the crippled, defenseless bomber, the German pilots, stunned by the sheer impossibility of the B-17 remaining airborne, merely circled the damaged aircraft. Witnesses later reported that the German fighters, perhaps out of respect for the immense bravery of the pilots, or the technical miracle of the Flying Fortress, simply dipped their wings in salute and withdrew, allowing the All-American to continue its impossible journey unmolested. The pilots quickly determined that the flight back to their base in England was impossible. The distance was too great, and the altitude they needed to maintain to avoid severe drag was taxing the remaining engines and the compromised structure to the limit. A decision was made to divert to the nearest available Allied airfield, aiming for the safety of a shorter runway and immediate mechanical assistance. They adjusted their course, relying on the navigator to plot a path across the final stretches of enemy-controlled airspace and toward the coast. Inside the plane, conditions were brutal. The massive hole in the rear of the fuselage meant the air temperature plummeted to freezing, and the wind tore through the compartment, making communication difficult and adding to the strain on the crew. The continuous noise and vibration tested the crew's resolve. The 10 men remained at their posts, monitoring the engines, keeping watch for enemy activity, and praying that the combined efforts of the pilots and the ingenious emergency repairs would hold together long enough to deliver them to safety. The final, immense hurdle facing the crippled B-17 Flying Fortress All-American was the English Channel. The flight across the freezing, choppy water posed two extreme dangers. The plane would instantly break up upon impact if the engines failed or the structure gave way, and the survivors would face certain death from hypothermia. The pilots, fighting the persistent control issues, had to maintain an incredibly stable flight path over the water, knowing that the slightest air turbulence or severe vibration could shatter the fractured fuselage and send the B-17 plummeting into the sea below. As they approached the English coast, the crew successfully managed to make radio contact with an Allied airfield. They desperately relayed their status, describing the almost impossible damage, the entire rear section sheared off and hanging by a thread, causing initial disbelief among the ground crews. Once the urgency and magnitude of the situation were confirmed, the receiving airfield immediately scrambled all emergency services, including ambulances and fire trucks, preparing for what they assumed would be a catastrophic crash landing by the barely flying fortress. The pilots quickly made the critical decisions necessary for the final approach. They rejected the option of having the remaining crew members bail out over England, fearing that the sudden shift in weight and balance might cause the already fractured B-17 Flying Fortress to break apart instantly. Instead, they opted for a desperate, controlled belly landing. Deploying the landing gear was considered too risky, as the immense strain and sudden drag could potentially tear the tail section completely off and destabilize the aircraft beyond recovery. With the English coastline finally in sight, the relief within the cockpit was immense. The crew had fought the plane across hundreds of miles of hostile territory and open sea. The structural miracle had held together long enough. The pilots aimed for the nearest suitable airfield, preparing for the final, terrifying maneuver, a smooth, controlled slide onto the grass. The sheer will of the crew, combined with the unparalleled structural durability of the B-17, was about to complete the most improbable journey of World War II. Having successfully crossed the coast, the pilots of the B-17 Flying Fortress All-American lined up for their ultimate test, the crash landing. The final maneuver required immense precision, as the pilots had to bring the fractured aircraft down onto the grass field without allowing the structurally compromised tail to contact the ground first and collapse the entire fuselage. They performed a perfect, controlled belly landing, skillfully easing the massive bomber onto the grass runway. The sound was a terrifying, metal screech as the unprotected underside tore across the field, but the B-17 remained miraculously intact as it slid to a stop. As the smoking, shattered aircraft finally came to rest, the immense danger had passed. The 10 men of the All-American crew quickly evacuated the bomber through the hatches, suffering only minor injuries despite the horrific damage and the violent, uncontrolled nature of the mid-air collision and subsequent landing. Emergency vehicles, including ambulances and fire trucks, rushed onto the airfield, surrounding the impossible sight of the half-severed plane. The survival of every single crew member was immediately recognized as a profound miracle of resilience and piloting skill. The post-crash inspection of the B-17 Flying Fortress All-American stunned every engineer and ground crew member who witnessed it. The plane was confirmation of the legendary durability of the B-17. The entire rear section was hanging by just a few pieces of control cable and aluminum sheeting, yet it had flown hundreds of miles across enemy territory and the English Channel. Engineers immediately recognized the aircraft as a vital piece of evidence, confirming that the structural redundancy built into the Flying Fortress design had been tested to the absolute limit and had, miraculously, passed. The story of the half-plane instantly spread throughout the United States Army Air Force and Royal Air Force units stationed in England. The B-17 Flying Fortress All-American quickly became a legendary symbol of the immense courage of the bomber crews and the astonishing resilience of the aircraft itself. While the bomber was deemed too damaged to ever fly again, its image, broken yet triumphant, became a potent piece of Allied propaganda, serving as a powerful reminder that their fighting spirit and technology could overcome even the most catastrophic of encounters. The incredible survival of the B-17 Flying Fortress All-American became an immediate and powerful tool for Allied propaganda during World War II. Photographs of the impossibly damaged bomber, with its tail nearly severed, were widely circulated in newspapers, magazines, and newsreels across the United States and Great Britain. The image of the half-plane, defying destruction, quickly became an iconic symbol of American technological superiority, the unwavering courage of its airmen, and the inherent ruggedness of the B-17 Flying Fortress itself. The story was used to boost morale both on the home front and among the fighting forces. For civilians, it showcased the incredible bravery of their sons fighting in the skies over Europe and reaffirmed their faith in American engineering and manufacturing. For the bomber crews, it served as a powerful testament to the B-17's legendary ability to absorb punishment and bring its crew home, providing a much-needed psychological boost amidst the brutal, high-casualty bombing campaigns over Germany. The All-American became a legend, a flying testament to endurance. The specific details of the aerial engagement, particularly the astonishing moment when the German Air Force pilots saluted the crippled bomber rather than finishing it off, added another layer to the propaganda narrative. This unexpected act of chivalry, though rarely publicized at the time, was a testament to the universal respect for courage. It underscored the sheer impossibility of the B-17 remaining airborne and served as a powerful, albeit subtle, counter-narrative to the dehumanization of the enemy, recognizing the shared humanity even in the midst of total war. The damaged B-17 Flying Fortress All-American itself became a static exhibit. Though it never flew again, the aircraft was carefully preserved and eventually toured United States Army Air Force bases across England, where it was displayed as a visual lesson in resilience and engineering. Its physical presence, with the massive, jagged tear in its fuselage, served as a tangible reminder to ground crews and new bomber recruits of the extraordinary challenges faced by bomber crews and the incredible robustness of the B-17 design, solidifying its place in aviation legend. The incredible survival of the B-17 Flying Fortress All-American bomber, with its tail nearly severed, cemented the aircraft's legendary status in aviation history. The incident became one of the most celebrated examples of the B-17's unparalleled ruggedness and defensive strength, qualities that made it indispensable to the United States Army Air Force's strategic bombing campaign over Europe. The All-American proved that the Flying Fortress was not just a machine, but a testament to American engineering that could withstand unimaginable punishment and still bring its crew home. The 10 men of the All-American crew were hailed as heroes. Their quick thinking, bravery, and exceptional flying skills under unimaginable pressure ensured that all aboard survived the catastrophic mid-air collision and the subsequent, impossible journey. Their story became a powerful symbol of the courage and resilience of the young airmen who flew perilous missions daily, demonstrating that even in the face of near-certain destruction, teamwork and unwavering determination could lead to miraculous outcomes. The B-17 Flying Fortress went on to complete thousands more bombing missions, eventually dropping more ordnance than any other Allied bomber during World War II. Its reputation for bringing its crews home, often heavily damaged but still flying, was a source of immense morale. The All-American incident, in particular, became an extreme example that was often recounted, reinforcing the belief among bomber crews that they were flying one of the most survivable aircraft ever built. Today, the story of the B-17 Flying Fortress All-American remains a cornerstone of World War II aviation history. It is a powerful reminder of the incredible human and mechanical resilience demonstrated during the aerial campaigns over Europe. The aircraft itself, though no longer in existence, lives on through countless photographs, historical accounts, and the enduring legend that a plane with its tail nearly cut off can still fly home, a true testament to the Flying Fortress name.